Thank you. My name is Judy. I'm a graduate student here at Howard. I'm going to present a study that I've done on gentrification and racial discrimination in the housing market. So the motivation for this study is some of the contradictory findings that we have on the effects of gentrification in the housing market. And the premise of my study is that when you look at gentrification in isolation, it may not give you a clear picture of the direction or the effects that it may have on different households. But by relating it to other social or economic factors that are taking place in the housing market, then you're able to get a clearer direction that may be relevant for policy. So the hypothesis of the study relating gentrification and racial discrimination, literature on racial discrimination still shows suburban segregation remains persistent. So if you have racial discrimination taking place in the suburbs while you have gentrification in the inner cities, then this is going to lead to fewer housing options for minority groups. So the study, I use American Housing Survey data for the DC metropolitan area, and some of the research questions that I seek to answer look at the extent of discrimination, its variation across income groups, and the role of gentrification and spatial patterns on the discrimination. So the study is based on a search cost model, which I modify to incorporate the effect of gentrification on search costs. So what this model shows is that if you have aversion by white sellers to dealing with minorities or to dealing with blacks, then the long-run equilibrium is going to involve market segmentation with minority groups receiving housing at more inferior terms. So the assumption of the model is that you have buyers who know the distribution of housing and they know their utility functions, so they have a choice to remain with the best house that they have so far or to continue to search and increase their utility. So by introducing aversion into the model, aversion is introduced by alpha, which is equal to the probability of finding a seller who is averse to dealing with blacks, multiplied by the proportion of white sellers in the neighborhood. And then the proportion of white sellers is given as a function of amenities. And in that way, that introduces the process of gentrification. The justification for this is derived from literature that has seen an increase in amenities leads to reversals in spatial patterns. So you have an increase in amenities in the inner city that is going to reduce the low-income households. They'll be pushed out of the inner city as the high-income households move into the inner city. And then the other literature also shows the association between amenities and racial composition with increase in percentage white increasing as amenities increase in the neighborhood. So when you introduce aversion into the model, the effect of that, the effect of introducing the alpha term is that a part of the density function is reduced to a value where the utility of the household is going to be equal to 0. So essentially by having aversion in the market, that is going to reduce benefits of searching for housing for minority groups. And given that for the white buyer, the value of alpha is equal to 0, it therefore means that the implication of the model is that you're going to have price differentials, and the price differentials are going to be an increasing function of white composition as well as an increasing function of the process of gentrification in the neighborhood. So to estimate the price differentials, I use a bid rent function. And just going through this a little quickly, the bid rent function assumes that housing units or households with similar demographic characteristics are going to have similar utility functions. So what I do is to stratify the households based on those 4 criteria, those 3 criteria, and then I also separate the white and the black households and then run regressions for the black households to determine the coefficients for the black households. And then also I incorporate special regression analysis to separate spatial influences from racial preferences. So the coefficients that I derive from running the regressions on the black households, I then use those coefficients to determine the mean values. I use those coefficients on the mean values of the black strata and use the same coefficients on the mean values of the white strata, so that the divergence between the white bids, the actual white bids, and the hypothetical bids that the black households are paying is the measure of gentrification, or rather is the measure of racial discrimination. And then to estimate displacement, I use a logistic regression where the dependent variable is equal to 1 if a household remains in the same housing unit over a period of time. And then I introduce a ratio variable to see the extent of displacement for different racial groups. So some of the findings that I show for some of the strata, I see a significant gentrification variable, which is negative, meaning that gentrification does raise the bid rent in the neighborhood. And then I also have the racial composition variable. There's the percent white coefficient, and also there's the black neighborhood coefficient, which is positive. So it shows that as you have an increase in the white population in the neighborhood, that is going to raise the bid rent, while on the other hand, the black neighborhood variable, it's a dummy variable that is equal to 1 if you have 75% of the population in the neighborhood that is black. So that is positive, showing that the bid rent declines when the population goes beyond, the percent composition of blacks in the neighborhood goes beyond a certain level. And then the results also show presence of spatial autocorrelation predominantly in high income strata, and then they show increased displacements. This is shown in the results for the logistic regression. The black coefficient is negative, and what this means is that the probability of a black household, or rather the probability of a household moving out of this housing unit from one period of time to the next is higher if that household is black. And then we also have the negative gentrification coefficient, which also shows that when you have gentrification as opposed to a zone where you do not have gentrification, the probability of a household moving out of that housing unit is going to be higher. And then the results from the measure of racial discrimination, I see a variation such that the black households are made to pay more for housing units that are being occupied by the whites, so that the values for the hypothetical bids by blacks are higher than the actual mean white bids that are paid. So that shows that there's definitely racial discrimination, with blacks paying more for housing. So some of the conclusions that I derive are the results show pure racial discrimination, with blacks being made to pay more for housing identical to that of whites. And then the probability of racial discrimination is coming back to the inner city is increasing as you have the composition of race in the inner city being altered. And then you have displacement of blacks, which is disproportionately higher than that of non-blacks from the inner city. And then we also see market segmentation given the signs of the coefficients for the racial composition variables. So what these findings show us, they highlight the need for a revitalized urban housing affordability agenda as the primary means of addressing housing stress and combating the outcomes associated with gentrification and racial discrimination. Some of the specific responses that may be applied would include government finding more resources to finance construction or rehabilitate more affordable units and to support rent subsidy programs. And then also, in addition to that, we need regulatory measures that can be applied to encourage location of such units throughout urban areas so as to avoid the concentration of poverty that has been seen in public housing. And then other measures that these findings point towards is the development of mixed income communities which offer a variety of housing prices that provide housing choices for multiple income levels. And then thirdly, we have inclusionary zoning that can play a big role by mandating that a certain amount of housing must be reserved for low-income residents. And then other measures would also focus on increasing individual assets to reduce dependence on subsidized housing. And this would involve home ownership programs, job creation strategies, and also support for existing businesses, particularly in gentrifying areas, so that these businesses are able to weather the change that is taking place. And then finally, the policies could also involve increased participation by community organizations. Community should be able to play a bigger role in providing input into design and into the design and the redevelopment of the neighborhoods through probably allowing the community organizations to review development proposals to determine the displacement effects of some of the planned developments. Thank you.